Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. Today we'll talk about two things that usually send normal people to sleep: nuclear power plants and Central Asia. If you're still here after that sentence, you're my kind of audience. We'll start with Belarus, move to Kazakhstan and the wider region, and finish with the uncomfortable question: if you walk away from a region out of moral outrage, who walks in instead? Belarus has decided to add a third power unit to its existing nuclear power plant at Ostrovets. Officially, it's the Belarusian NPP. In practice, it's a Russian-designed station with two vver 1200 reactors already online, covering around 40% of the country's electricity demand. The choice they faced was simple. Option A: build a brand new nuclear plant on a fresh site in another region. Option B: bolt a third reactor onto the existing Ostrovets site, which was originally designed to host up to 4 units. They chose option B, not because of historical destiny, but because Excel is cruel and very honest. At Ostrovets, the site is already licensed and studied. No need for new large-scale geological surveys. Logistics exist: railway, roads, power lines, cooling, everything is in place. They still have the heavy construction ecosystem: concrete plants, specialized equipment, local companies that already survived one nuclear build without killing anyone. Human capital is trained. Belarus now has its own nuclear construction company and staff with real experience, which is rare and expensive to recreate. So the preparatory phase collapses from maybe 15 years if politicians argue, to something closer to 6-7 years of real work, assuming the regulator signs off and contracts are signed. Until the state nuclear regulator stamps the paper, all the speeches by presidents and deputy prime ministers are just warm air with microphones attached. From the engineering point of view, the third unit will almost certainly be another vver 1200, not because fantasy is forbidden, but because mixing different reactor types and fuel chains on one site brings a zoo of extra storage, safety, and licensing headaches, which no serious operator wants unless forced. This is the first structural point. Once you build one big nuclear plant, you have a strong incentive to keep stacking identical blocks on the same site. It is cheaper, faster, and easier to regulate. Romantic slogans don't do that. Path dependence does. Now the fun part: reactors are not just hardware. They are embedded in contracts, supply chains, and dependencies. Belarus doesn't live in a vacuum. Its nuclear build is tightly tied to Rosatom, which designed the plant and certified several Belarusian factories to produce nuclear-grade equipment. That means fuel will come from a specific supplier. Spare parts, lifetime extensions, upgrades, decommissioning all lock the country into a long technical and financial orbit. Extra capacity at Ostrovets doesn't just cover domestic demand. It can feed regional grids when conditions and politics allow. In theory, you can imagine a union energy space, where capacity in Belarus also indirectly supports consumers in Russia and vice versa. Not because anyone loves anyone, but because electrons and capacity markets don't care about national myths, they care about interconnectors, prices, and contracts. So when you see third unit in Belarus, read additional long-term leverage in regional power flows locked into one vendor's ecosystem, and more arguments in any future negotiation about tariffs, transit, and political loyalty. Let's shift east. Kazakhstan is not some marginal player with yurts and nice postage stamps. It is the largest uranium producer on the planet, responsible for roughly 40+% of global primary uranium supply in recent years, and until recently, it had no operating nuclear power plant at all. You couldn't make up a more perfect illustration of raw resources without integrated strategy. That is starting to change. Kazakhstan has 4 joint ventures with Rosatom in uranium mining and processing. It is moving toward building its first nuclear power plant with an international consortium led by Russia, according to recent political declarations. Russian nuclear universities and companies are opening branches and training centers in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan to prepare the necessary specialists. On the other side of the chessboard, you have the United States and its allies. The US has rolled out the familiar C5+1 political format and a whole series of headlines about strengthening ties with Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. In Uzbekistan, US companies have been advertised as future suppliers of small modular reactors, SMRs, bundled together with priority rights for critical minerals exploration and extraction in joint projects. There is a small detail: those American SMRs are mostly not built yet. On paper, everything is beautiful: clean energy, advanced technology, billions in deals. In reality, Uzbekistan has worded its commitments carefully. It will study SMR designs after reference plants actually exist and operate successfully. Translation: show us a working unit first, then we'll talk. Until then, we politely smile and sign memoranda. So the structural picture is this: Kazakhstan supplies a giant share of the world's uranium. Russia is deeply embedded in its mining and is pushing for reactor builds and fuel cycles. The US and EU push alternative nuclear and critical minerals partnerships to dilute that dependence. China quietly buys into uranium assets and logistics. Nobody in this game is for or against democracy. They are for control of fuel, technology, and corridors. Now to the more unpleasant part. In any big neighbor, Russia, China, whoever, you always hear the same choir. Forget Central Asia, only problems. They betrayed us in the 90s. Close borders, remember every old grievance and be morally pure. Sounds noble. Structurally, it achieves exactly one thing. It hands the region to whoever is not busy performing moral theater. While some people shout, "Cut them off," the reality on the ground looks like this. U.S. State Department runs a steady campaign of trade, security, and energy initiatives with all 5 Central Asian states. The EU pushes its own connectivity and energy corridor programs. Turkey expands cultural and economic influence with very clear long-term ambition. Meanwhile, millions of tons of oil and goods transit across Kazakhstan, including Russian oil to China and potentially goods southwards through Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan to Iran and the Persian Gulf, bypassing maritime choke points. If one major neighbor decides to board up the border psychologically and politically, nothing remains empty. The vacuum gets filled by Washington, Brussels, Ankara, Beijing, or any combination of them. From a systems point of view, the logic is simple. Resources, uranium, rare earths, hydrocarbons, transit routes, instruments, nuclear projects, educational branches, infrastructure loans, military cooperation, migration rules. Outcome: whoever embeds deeper into these structures sets the rules for the next 30 to 50 years. Whether individual citizens on either side feel offended by something that happened 30 years ago is emotionally understandable and strategically irrelevant. The resources and corridors are still there. Someone will own the contracts. One more important distinction: the difference between announced nuclear projects and concrete, steel, and running reactors. Belarus, 2 vver 120 units already in operation, exporting real electrons, planning a 3rd unit on a prepared site. Russia, Kazakhstan, moving from just mining uranium toward full-cycle nuclear cooperation and a first NPP with vendors, regulators, and universities already in motion. Uzbekistan, US, big declarations about SMRs and critical minerals, but the key condition is after reference SMRs are actually built in the US, which has not happened yet. Turkey, talking about a second US-designed nuclear plant while still struggling to digest the first one with Russian technology and financing. For viewers who like headlines, nuclear cooperation is not the same as capacity on the grid. Real influence comes from the plants that run for 60 years, the fuel contracts, the maintenance chains, and the student cohorts graduating into that ecosystem. So, what do we actually see if we strip away the emotional noise? Belarus expands an existing nuclear hub because infrastructure and workforce are already there, and time to kilowatt is shorter and cheaper. Kazakhstan sits on a giant share of global uranium and is being courted simultaneously by Russia, the US, the EU, China, and Turkey, each with its own bundle of nuclear, mineral, and logistics offers. Central Asia is not a nostalgic periphery, it is a choke point for resources in transit, and whoever treats it like dead weight is politely removed from the game by those who don't. Nuclear power plants, uranium mines, rail corridors, and pipeline routes are not ideological toys. They are the hardware of future political options. You either help design that hardware or you live inside someone else's design. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones, and try to look at the map at least as often as you look at the newsfeed.